Thank you so much for joining me today on the phone drives. I'm really looking forward to talking with you.
Yeah, and thank you so much for having me.
So, you are running to serve as your state representative in Texas, House
Yeah.
District 36. Um, what inspired you to get involved in politics?
It started several years back. I had begun engaging at the state level with legislators about the vaccine mandates or the attempt to mandate vaccines back during the measles outbreak. Um, and then myself and two other moms founded Texans for Vaccine Choice, which wound up becoming huge and very impactful in the state. But I stepped away after a couple of years to kind of focus on my family. And then COVID hit, and things started to ramp up again with what I felt were restrictions on liberty and freedom. And then I found out probably too late in the game, but because of the school closures and going to virtual and all this stuff, that was kind of an opportunity for certain ideologies to creep in to public education. And so things kind of got under a microscope with me, and I learned a little bit. I learned a lot of stuff that I can't unlearn, no matter what. Even if I wanted to go back in time and unlearn it, it just got me so fired up. And then when I found out that I had been redistricted into a House district with our current legislator, who believes there's 6+ biological sexes, and parents should parent and teachers should teach and never the twain shall meet, and all of these things that I just patently don't agree with, and that no one had stepped up to run against him, I decided, well, if not me, who? And if not now, when?
Yeah, I mean, it's been interesting to follow what's going on with, like parents' movements in these red states, particularly in Texas. It
Mhm.
seems that parents are getting really involved in fighting for their kids and fighting to, have access to know what they're being taught and exposed to in schools, but also to have a say. Like it's been this
Right.
weird turn. I'm not a parent. I've never had kids in school, so I don't actually know the history of this kind of thing, but it seems like lately over the past few years, it's become accepted and normalized to not inform parents about what's going on in their kids' schools.
Right. In our school district, it was particularly egregious because not only were they restricting access to curriculum, but they were also restricting access to parents physically. So for 2 years until last month, parents could not visit their child on campus. They couldn't bring their child a lunch. They couldn't go inside the physical building where their children were for 8 hours a day. So we didn't have any idea what books were in the classroom, what was on the wall, what they were pushing, any sort of agenda or any sort of questionable lessons. We couldn't even bring birthday cupcakes. It was so ridiculous. I think the 2020-2021 school year, my son's school didn't, or my daughter's school didn't hand out like paper assignments because they thought that COVID could go home on a piece of paper. So it was just everything just changed. And it was like we were flying a plane without ever going through instructions, and the plane was upside down and we just didn't know where we were going. So and I think it just made people really rethink the public education system, the monopoly they sort of have here in Texas. We don't have school choice here. So unlike some states, we can't just say, I'm going to take my tax money and go to a different school, or I don't agree with this. Here's the official process to go through. Let's dot our I's, cross our T's, and we'll get these books removed from the shelves. We're being actively disregarded and excluded.
Why do you think that happened? Is this a relatively new trend?
Um, I think everybody was just everybody's kind of had their head in the sand for a while. I'm not going to say that it's only been during the pandemic. But I will say that it's been on a speed train, like a bullet train since 2020. I think it's just opportunistic. It coincided with an emotional political swing throughout our country. And it was a very it was the strategy that I'm going to go ahead and say it, but it's the strategy that the left had to start at the bottom, down ballot races, and go up from there. So justice of the peace, school board, et cetera, et cetera. So now in what once was a conservative community, we have 5 school board members who are at least swing to hard left, very ideological, lots of identity politics, and then 2 conservative members of the school board. And so they basically control, in order to get a book reviewed, it has to go through a grievance process, which means it has to go through the principal, then the superintendent, and then the school board. So it's not just let's put this panel together and review these books. There's a month-long process for that.
What kind of books are we talking about?
Things like Gender Queer, which is a graphic book about a transgender boy. I guess I got the terminology wrong, but you understand what I'm saying. But it's got
it's a female who's identifying as a boy, or a male who's identifying as a girl. Okay, got
male.
It. I refer to them by their sex, but then it gets confusing when you're adding the trans thing.
Right.
Anyway, so we're talking.
And normally I do as well, but it was the ideology is in the book, and it has graphic drawings of males together having sex, masturbating, oral sex. I mean, these are very clear-cut drawings, and the idea that's being pushed is that these books need to be on shelves in order to affirm the LGBTQIA2S plus students. But I don't see where that affirms anything that a 13, 14-year-old should be even considering.
In general, the pushing of gender identity ideology in schools to kids, I find really disturbing and troubling. It's obviously very confusing to kids. I've talked to lots of parents who will say, my kid came home from school and said that, maybe a boy can be a girl if he likes wearing pink, and and they don't understand what's going on because they're young and because it doesn't make any sense also.
Right. And the nearest school district, or one of the nearest school districts, is Austin ISD. Austin is, a fairly open-minded city. It's got a reputation for that. Recently they had Pride Week, during which a lot of teachers were tweeting about LGBTQ pride, etc. One made the assertion that 20 out of 32 of her students are identify as somewhere as gender nonconforming, or lesbian, or gay, or bi, or pan, or demi, or whatever.
And where did they get those ideas from?
Exactly. They wouldn't even be thinking these things. And I've seen that in my own home with my oldest child, where she confided in me that she was attracted to girls, and she was 11 or almost 12 years old. But then she tried the pronoun game with me. And that was a hard no. I mean, I'm just from a grammatical point of view, it was boggling my mind to call one person they, them. It just didn't make sense to me. But also what I told her in that moment was, I carried you, I birthed you, I know who you are, and I know that can't change no matter what. You can be and think and feel however you want, but that doesn't change who you are biologically. And then it was well, I'm pan, I'm bi. It was just, I didn't even know where these terms were coming from in 6th grade.
And how did she respond to you when you responded to her in that way?
There was a little bit of back and forth. It wasn't contentious or anything. It was just kind of having a discussion, very open discussion. And then within a couple of days, it was gone. It wasn't even an issue.
Mhm.
She had gone on to the next thing, which was, I guess, bi, and then the next thing, which was pan. And what's interesting is that in this past year, she's now 14. I referred to her as a lesbian, and she took issue with that. She took great issue with that. She was like,
Mm.
I'm not. And I said, well, you're attracted to girls. And she said, yes. And I said, but in my day, that's lesbian. But then I did a little bit more reading into the ideology and everything, and found that this is a common trajectory for teenage girls. It's like, I have a crush, it's on a girl, so I start to question things, and if I have a crush on a girl, then I can't be a lesbian, I must be a boy. And then they just, it's like this complete erasure of anything that makes any logical sense.
It's so terrible that this is what's being framed as progressive and left
Right.
wing. Just because, I mean, I am hardly interested in these terms anymore because they seem to
Right.
make no sense and to be totally meaningless. And people throw around left and right wing, and I don't think anybody really knows what they're talking about. But, it's been traditionally, historically, it's been the left who have fought for gay rights,
Right.
who've fought for, acceptance of people who are gay or lesbian. And now what's become very clear is that this gender identity ideology that's being pushed by the left is totally homophobic. Like the fact that
Yeah.
your young daughter would say to you, I'm attracted to girls, and be comfortable with all of these other labels and then reject the term lesbian, I think is
Mhm.
really, really a bit kind of disturbing. It's upsetting in any
Right.
case.
And I think part of that is that there is that push that if you identify as lesbian, or you say that you're lesbian but you don't accept trans women, then you're transphobic, so you
Uh-huh.
can't call yourself, especially at such a young age, when being called unaccepting or exclusive or whatever is really heartbreaking for kids. You want to be kind and empathetic, you don't want to be told that you're a racist, a bigot, or whatever. So I think that was part of the confusion for her is, if I'm a lesbian, then I must be pan because otherwise I'm transphobic.
So did you approach the school about this at all?
I didn't. I wanted to she wanted to keep a level of confidentiality about it. Now she's not out there with it, but she's a lot more comfortable. And I was just telling somebody earlier, like, once we kind of set the boundaries in terms of what makes sense and what is logical, then she became much more confident and comfortable in herself. And she just kind of let it go. It's a non-issue now. She's not flaunting it, but she is who she is. She's a female, teenage girl who, at some point may have a relationship with another girl.
Mm-hmm. And you've, taken on this fight in your political work.
Yes.
I wonder if you can tell me a bit about what's going on right now in Texas in terms of legislation around transitioning kids.
So last year, so in Texas, the legislature only meets every other year, on an odd numbered year. So 2021, there was a bill to end gender modification surgery for minors. It didn't go anywhere. It died before it even hit committee or before it hit the floor. We did have, thankfully, a Save Women's Sports bill that passed after the third special session, so finally around November. Well, at that same time that was passing, I kind of assumed, for some reason, like, I'm in Texas, I assumed the bathroom issue had been decided. I know that it made news a few years back, but then kind of died down. Well, come to find out, in my school district, boys were using girls' locker rooms, restrooms, being booked in hotel rooms with boys on school-sponsored trips, as long as the boy identified as a girl at that given moment. Parents complained and were stonewalled. So in November, I attended a board meeting and I just reached out to anybody and everybody that I could to try to get a good army of, I guess, gender critical people who had knowledge. So that's how I got hooked up with Beth from Save Women's Sports and some local activist, Isabella, who is here in Austin. And then from there, I decided to just jump headfirst into this issue, reading books, watching documentaries, etc. Well, recently, our Attorney General was asked to write an opinion. So it's not law, it's not legally binding, but it's his opinion as an Attorney General looking over case law and precedent. Whether or not these surgeries, the wrong sex hormones, and puberty blockers could be considered child abuse. And when he looked at the statute and looked at precedent, he said that, yes, it could, because human beings have a natural right to be able to procreate, and this makes minors infertile. And so you're taking away their basically their constitutional rights. That opened the door for our governor to then say, okay, the Department of Family Protective Services, you may now begin to investigate certain families, not all families, mind you, but certain families. And there was a swift response from the ACLU on behalf of Doe, confidential family, with a trans child who is seeking services from a medical practitioner who was, I guess, going to give puberty blockers or wrong sex hormones. I haven't seen the details in their treatment, but and so the investigations were stopped, and now this is an ongoing case here that I'm hoping gets decided quickly. But in the meantime, we've had successes. 2 hospital systems have ended these services for minors. So a hospital system that previously was doing double mastectomies on girls as young as 12 has ceased offering those services. So that's a win. Mm-hmm. However, it's very tentative. If this is overturned, if the Supreme Court for some reason says that these children have a right to this quote unquote affirming healthcare, then it opens the floodgates again. And whatever happens here will be repeated in other states.
Okay, so that case that you just mentioned, Doe versus Abbott, mm-hmm. That stemmed from an attempt to investigate the family that was in the process of transitioning their kid. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And like, what's the process there in terms of that case? Where is it right now? Where is it heading?
Most recently, I think it was March 11th was the last hearing on it, and the court upheld the stay, which means that the investigations cannot continue at this time. Mm. So the Attorney General is representing Governor Abbott in this case and is trying to take it, like they're dedicated to this issue. That was the longest opinion that Ken Paxton has ever written. And it was very well researched. I highly recommend anybody who is interested in this case read it, because it's not hyperbole. It's, he researched every aspect of this type of medical service and came to the conclusion, based on that research plus precedent, case law, that this definitely does violate a child's rights, because a child cannot consent. It's mm-hmm. violating informed consent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so what he's arguing in that letter essentially is that it constitutes child abuse. Mm-hmm. This is under provisions of Chapter 261 of the Texas Family Code, which I'm not familiar with, but I'm sure you are.
It's a pretty lengthy code. Yeah.
And I appreciate that approach, actually, because a lot of people say transing kids is child abuse, but to approach that in a legal sense and to be able to have legal backing for that argument, I think is really helpful. I'm curious to know if I'm assuming that this is your position as well, that transitioning kids equates to child abuse.
I think that, generally I don't love investigating parents. I think parents are in quite a difficult position.
Mm-hmm.
I think that definitely, and this is mentioned in the opinion, definitely there are cases of Munchausen by proxy where parents are just reveling in this diagnosis of, trans child, like they wear it like a trophy
Mm-hmm.
or like a token. But for the most part, I'd rather see them go after practitioners, because I
Mm-hmm.
really feel like they are the crux of the issue, that they're telling parents, like, would you rather have a dead daughter or dead son or a living daughter? And what kind of choices that make?
Right.
And none of it's based on good medicine.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you that they should be going after these practitioners, because it's so unethical
Right.
to, impose these hormone treatments and or surgeries on minors who really don't understand what they're getting into and don't understand the long-term impacts of this, and have no real idea, how they're going to feel as an adult with this altered
Right.
body and being incapable of conceiving a child. When you're 13 years old, probably you don't care that much about being able to reproduce.
Right. You don't think about it. I mean, rarely. And the fact that they're blurring the ages of consent. They're saying now this is determined. A child can determine their gender by age 4, and then from there it's not changeable. Like, they're not going to ever grow out of it, is not only completely false, but it's also opening the door for many more issues with regard to consent. I mean, we're already pushing against women's ability to consent to men in their spaces. Now we're going to talk about a child's ability to consent at as young as 4 to puberty blockers. That's just completely insane to me and very harmful.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you don't let the child lead at 4.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these ideologues are really terrifying parents. Like you say, they're saying, would you rather have a dead child, or would you rather trans their kids? And they're referencing, I was just reading an article about all this, and it references this, 41% of trans kids
Mm-hmm.
are, hold on, let me find my quote here. Where did I put it? Oh, it says with suicide attempt rate up to 41% for children and adolescents with gender dysphoria, there is a
Mm-hmm.
need for comprehensive care for these youth. I hate that they frame it as care. I hate that they frame it
I do
as
as
like
well.
a necessary medical treatment that's like life-saving, when it's this like horribly destructive treatment that nobody needs. This is not
Right.
necessary for any person, never mind for kids.
Right. And we're taking this idea of medicine and we're warping it into healthcare.
Yeah.
Like, and we did that back when as a country, we decided healthcare is a right. So now you can go to any doctor and say, this is what I want. And they should be able to give it to you on demand. And that applies particularly with these services, because there's no medical benefit and there's no medical necessity. It's basically you're self-diagnosing, you're going in and saying that, oh, I think I'm a boy, and the doctor has no other options than to say, okay, well, let's make you a boy.
Mm-hmm.
Because every society that they're a part of, academic society, is telling them that that is the only way to do it. They'll be basically canceled or, taken out if they don't comply.
Mm-hmm. And so after, I think, so I was reading about a woman, Dr. I don't know how to say her name, Ximena Lopez,
I think it's Jimena.
Jimena. So
Mm-hmm.
I didn't like,
That's okay.
I was
No,
like, I said it completely
I'm
wrong as you
pretty sure
possibly
it's Jimena,
can.
but I'm not absolutely sure.
No, I think you're right. That makes sense to me. And she was involved in the Gender Education and Care Interdisciplinary Support Program, which was part of the UT Southwestern Healthcare System. Am I getting this right?
Yes,
You're
so I
familiar
think
with this woman, eh?
I think she was with the Genesis Clinic,
Okay. Yeah,
which
right.
was a
That's
part of
what I was
a
thinking.
big hospital system in Dallas.
Yeah. And so that program was shut down.
Mm-hmm.
And she's fighting back. I guess I'm curious to know, what do you think about these practitioners? Do you think that they're well-meaning, or do you think this is about fame and fortune for them? What's the incentive there?
I think that our every aspect of this pervasive movement has been hijacked by ideologues. So
Mhm.
there's a lot of political pressure to cave. There's a lot of emotional, mental pressure, societal pressure, cultural pressure to be a good person and just give these kids what they need. Um, but for somebody like her, I, I haven't read into her background, but I know that she was profiting off of this. There were arguments for a while that these clinics are losing money, and that's absolutely a lie. They're not losing money at all. Um, but for her to argue that not providing this care is discrimination, I think is diminishing the act of discrimination entirely. I think that um, she's doing a disservice to the idea that anybody can be discriminated against if they don't get what they want. It's
Mhm.
just it's to me is sick. Like today, and this is kind of not off topic, but unrelated to the medical part. But today, I saw a Facebook post from somebody in a nearby school district saying that make sure you come out and support creating something along the lines of like creating a welcoming space for our students who are neurodivergent students, differently abled students, and gender diverse students. And I thought, okay, now they're trying to hijack disability rights. First, they came for lesbian and gay rights. Then they came for women's rights and women's spaces. And now it's going to be an ADA thing where you are discriminated against if you identify as the other gender, which means that if you don't provide me the care that I need, that's going to be an ADA violation. So I guess this is where this is headed now,
Mhm.
which, as the mother of my other daughter, has disabilities, and I find that to be important to piggyback on something that is so crucial to our society is just it's disgusting to me.
Mhm. It does seem like people in Texas are really fighting back on this stuff more so than in many other states. Why do you think that is? What is it about Texas?
I think we understand that we are under. I mean, I can be really dramatic and say under attack, but there are a lot of attempts for on the part of progressives and the far left. So the 2% that agree with all of this to push this in Texas, because if Texas flips, that's it. That's like the rest of the country. People are fleeing from California and New York to come here.
Mhm.
Um, and if they take us over, they've got nothing but Florida to go after. And so now is the time, obviously it's an election year, so that impacts things as well. But now's the time for people in a position to do so, to speak up and take a stand and understand. And then I know that these these things are uncomfortable to talk about. You're talking about children's breasts or whatever, and you're setting yourself to be labeled as phobic or a bigot or whatever. But it's time to take those shots, and it's time to stand in truth for kids, because what's going to happen 5, 10, 15 years down the line if these schools, these teachers think that 2/3 of their class is gender diverse? Then are 2/3 of those students going to wind up infertile? And then,
Mhm.
I mean, what are the downstream effects here? And the fact that we're not acknowledging biology and we're putting girls in a position to question their instincts when boys come in their spaces is just terribly damaging to an entire
Yeah.
generation.
Yeah, for sure. And I know that some people have labeled that grooming. And I mean, it's hard enough when you're a girl, I think. And you're sort of, I mean, you're socialized to be very polite and to not be rude. And also, you're just kind of learning. about the world, and you're learning about how to say yes and no and how to set boundaries. You're just a kid, so you don't really understand boundaries probably.
Right.
You're supposed to respect authority and adults. And so I think it's probably difficult enough for parents to be teaching their kids, you know, when to say no and what like inappropriate behavior is, and like when you should like talk to an adult about something that another adult has done or said or anything like
Right.
that. And now we're teaching like a whole generation of girls that they should, yeah, ignore their instincts. Like if there's a boy or even a grown man in their change room or in their washroom, if they feel upset about that, that's their problem. That
Right.
makes them bigoted, and they need to, fight that and accept this clearly inappropriate situation that most girls and women would sort of just inherently feel uncomfortable with. And now we're
And
supposed to reject all of those feelings that are there to protect us.
and on top of that, we go to the grooming aspect where you have these social media influencers who are saying, like, if your parents continue to call you by the wrong pronoun, equating that to abuse and saying, I'll be your family now. These glitter families, these glitter moms, and schools doing that as well. There was a district, and it's in a different state. I think it was Wisconsin, where the teachers had a training where it was like the parents haven't earned the right to know what their child's gender identity is. And how
Mm.
how perverted is that to teach kids, come to me, don't go to your parents, don't tell your parents, and then whatever you tell me, I won't tell your parents. That's absolute, like, cookie cutter grooming kind of thing. Like, it's not that typical, if you tell your parents I'm going to kill them or something like that. Obviously it's not to that extent, but it's sneakier, but it's
Yeah.
equally pervasive and it's equally dangerous.
Yeah, it really does open kids up to abuse, I think.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know, have you always been a Republican?
Yes, I mean, I haven't always been active. Um, I'm not the consummate good citizen that's voted in every single election, but um, I've always leaned right and have been, I've, the more I look into things, the more I research things, the more I understand that just sticking to simple, like, constitutional values would just do us a world of good. If we
Mhm.
would just go back to teaching what we're supposed to teach, reading, writing, math, science, history, our educate, like, our testing scores are awful. And I can only imagine what a burden it is for teachers to have to, on top of what they're hired to teach, to also be thinking constantly about all of these other non-educational. There's this argument that if a child doesn't feel safe or affirmed or comfortable, then they're not going to learn. But we're teaching them to be uncomfortable, and then they don't learn. And we're spending a good amount of the school day teaching about things that have nothing to do with basic education.
Well, yeah, and we're
So,
teaching kids that it's traumatic and like a horrible attack on your personhood and your rights if somebody doesn't use the pronouns you want them to use, and teaching them
oh,
to be
right,
concerned and upset about all these things that are not real, that are just
right.
imaginary and that don't make any sense. Like you'd think that that would be considered a distraction from education.
How confusing must it be to go through biology and learn that, these biological truths apply to all mammals, but humans, for some reason, don't, don't, that doesn't apply to them.
Yeah.
We don't follow the laws of nature at all. It
And
makes
that
no sense.
Yeah, and that their lives will be potentially ruined if they don't get these surgeries and go on puberty blockers and
Right,
hormone treatments. Like
right.
it's so dangerous and so confusing for kids.
And I'm trying to figure out how, it's really hard to stand in logic and truth and try to understand the other side, because in my opinion, I think somebody made a great analogy recently. It's like giving an anorexic diet pills.
Mm-hmm.
You don't do that. That's not care. That's actually quite harmful and the opposite of what you would want to do with an anorexic patient. You don't give in to um, their distorted view of themselves. So how did we get here? How did we get to this place where it's, if I don't get somebody to believe and then change me based on that belief, then I'm going to off myself. It just doesn't make any sense. How much are we feeding them, and how much is nature?
Mm-hmm. I mean, there are adult ideas being imposed on kids, and adults who claim to care about kids' best interests, but many of whom seem not to, and seem invested in profit. I'm sure many of them just want to play along and don't want to cause controversy by not going along or even by pushing back. I mean, I really, in a lot of ways, I feel bad for teachers because
Right.
there is a genuine fear that you'll lose your job if you don't go along
Oh,
with this
absolutely.
stuff.
Right. I talked to a woman from the Dallas area that had that. It wasn't with regard to gender ideology specifically, but it was her political stance. They didn't, the year before she was going to reach retirement, they did not hire her back for the following school year. So she lost her buy-in.
Oh.
It's a harsh reality. Doctors lose their position, or academic researchers and professors quite often come under attack because they hurt a student's feelings. I mean, that's what it comes down to. These are feelings. This is not anything physical. This is not anything physiological. This is a feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And words are violence now.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because so you're, basically a lifelong Republican.
Mm.
I'm assuming do you identify as right wing or conservative?
I don't really like. I mean,
Yeah.
I guess I should work on using the term left if I don't really like the term right wing, because it makes me sound like an extremist, and I don't think I'm extreme in the least. Now, some people would disagree. Um, I consider myself to be conservative, absolutely a conservative Republican.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I love liberty. I love freedom. I love the founding values upon which our country was built. I do I do know that can be twisted, where people are like, well, I'm free to parent how I want. Okay, to an extent, but once you start to make lifelong medical choices that have absolutely zero to do with health and well-being, that is child abuse. That's stripping rights from a child. That's just, to me, is beyond any kind of liberty, freedom discussion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because progressives will frame Republicans, conservatives, right wing people as homophobic. They're
Mm-hmm.
the ones who are fighting for gay and lesbian people to be accepted, for them to have the same rights as people who are heterosexual, and so on and so forth, and to, be free from violence, discrimination, etc. But it's clear that you're not homophobic at all.
No, no, not in the least. I I went to one prom in high school, and that was with a very flamboyant gay friend of mine. And then I guess what you would term an ally. I've been an ally for a long time. I think government should be out of marriage altogether, so you can marry, get into a contract with whoever you want. But that's a whole other issue. Um, but I think that this is one of those issues where you can't put a label on it. This is protection of women and girls. This is protection of children. This is protection of equal rights. Instead of watering them down to an identity. And I feel like it's the last bastion of equal rights that hasn't been co-opted by this movement is race. And I feel like that's probably not on the horizon. I think that would be way too politically risky. But this really is not a left and right wing thing. This is just a common sense truth. Truth is not subjective. It just isn't. There isn't your truth versus my truth. There are some things that are just objectively the truth, and we can't, chase them away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think this is a partisan issue at all. It shouldn't be. Often people would like to frame it as such, but
Right.
I and many other women that I know who've come out of the feminist movement have ended up, in conflict with a lot of other women in the feminist movement. And I come from the left also. I don't identify as left wing anymore, and I don't like what the left is doing these days. So I don't really tend to identify with any end of the political spectrum or any political ideology. But, we've come into conflict with other feminists who don't want us to engage with right-wing women or right-wing anyone, conservative women, Republicans. And to me, this is a fight that's about doing what's right and about telling the truth, about protecting women, about protecting kids. So I'm on side with anybody who wants to fight that. And I really wish that people would stop making it about like, well, if you believe in these things, you can only engage with other people who also believe in all these things. Like, I know that you and I probably have disagreements about some various issues. Abortion is probably a big one, and I don't know that much about your position on abortion, to be honest. So I'm happy to hear if you want to talk about it or not if you don't want to. But my position is essentially that I think any woman should be able to have an abortion whenever she wants.
Right. And most of the feminists that I've been in contact with about this issue, they're like, listen, I know that you're pro-life. I know you're 100% pro-life, and I am not, but the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So we can stand together. We can link arms. It doesn't matter. Not that abortion doesn't matter. That issue doesn't matter, but we can be focused in this area together, because without bridging that gap, without linking arms with people we would normally not even associate with because of our political ideologies, we cannot cross the finish line with this. We cannot stop the erasure of females. I'm not going to be referring to my daughters as birthing persons or uterus
menstruators,
bleeders. I just can't. It's something, and coming from the vaccine choice movement, that was very similar. It's like a single issue thing that means so much to so many families, that we had a lot of members and supporters who were typically on the left side, but they found that the Democrat legislators here in Texas were not friendly to the message of not mandating. So they felt politically homeless, as I'm sure you feel now, that this movement left you. You didn't leave it. So it was just an act of pushing deniers out, or, pushing dissent out, and so they can exist in an echo chamber.
Right. And it doesn't make any sense to me that I should have to, only, back when I was still identifying as a leftist and a socialist, that or that other women who are leftist should have to stick with only other leftists, because they're not going to get anywhere, because it's the left that's pushing this. Like, there are some people on the left I know who disagree with gender identity ideology and legislation, but it's primarily progressives who are pushing this ideology and pushing this legislation. So I don't know how we're supposed to fight back if we're only going to ally with or work with those kinds of people, because they don't want to work with us. I mean, to me, it started to feel a bit desperate. I was like, these people don't want you. Like, they're trashing you, and they're saying horrible things about you, and they're ostracizing you, and they're pushing you out, and you're still clinging to them. Like, no, like, have some self-respect. It's like when a boyfriend is like I think I related it to being in like a relationship with like an abusive boyfriend or a boyfriend who treats you horribly and you're like, no,
Right.
no, no, still love me and you won't leave. Like,
It's very similar. It's like that or like a Mean Girls movie or something. It just gets replayed over and over. And today somebody tweeted out that I was turf leaning, and I find that to be funny. I mean, I don't find the term to be insulting. I
I mean, it
actually
doesn't
joke to
make any sense as a term.
no, and I don't feel like I'm a radical anything. I think feminism is pretty simple when you break it down. Like
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't, and it certainly doesn't involve this stuff. I know a lot of conservatives blame the feminist movement for some of this, but I feel like that's not a very knowledgeable position, first of all, because there's feminists are not heterogeneous. There's a whole spectrum of feminism and first wave, second wave, third wave. Anyways, I could rabbit hole about that too. But if I'm just considered turf leaning, then I'm not out there enough. Because it should be pretty clear that this is not just a lean. This is
Feminist and
full in.
I mean, the whole term makes no sense to me because it's applied to people who aren't radical feminists. I don't identify as a radical feminist, and it uses that term exclusionary, and it's like, no, we're not excluding anyone who
Right.
identify as trans. Like, I suppose if you want to talk about exclusion, then you could say like, yeah, we want to exclude men from women's spaces, like particular women's spaces where women and girls are
Yeah.
vulnerable, not all the spaces. But the exclusion, I think, comes from the other end because, for example, when we're talking about the sports issue, it's like, well, now girls and young women are being excluded from competing fairly in sports
Right.
because they're being forced to compete with boys and young men.
Right. Absolutely. I saw recently that a school out of Houston was offering a scholarship to bring more women into STEM, but they were specific in saying that this is being offered to women and those who identify as women. So it's not to bring women into STEM, it's to just bring anybody into STEM. This isn't, I mean, this is the antithesis of everything that feminism has fought for. This is also the antithesis of everything that lesbians and gays fought for. This has nothing to do with sexual preference or orientation. There's a woman that lives near me. No, sorry, a man. And she is the director, I think the state director of Planned Parenthood. It's a man who had surgery and is now in a relationship with a woman. So this is a straight man who is the director of a woman's health organization and is also, head of Lambda Legal. Well, also not gay. So it just doesn't make any sense to me. Like, this person has got the trifecta. It's ahead of an abortion rights organization or women's healthcare organization and the head of a lesbian and gay legal organization, but he is neither of those things.
Really crazy.
I know.
Yeah, I mean, I am in some ways I understand when right wingers will blame the feminist movement, but it's not. I mean, the history of the feminist movement has nothing to do with what's going on now.
Right.
First wave feminism, second wave feminism, those movements were still about rights and protecting women from male violence and those kinds of things, protecting them in the workplace. And then, in the 90s, we got third wave feminism that became super ideological, didn't seem to be fighting for any practical rights or any practical things. And then I think it just got kind of taken over by academia, which doesn't teach, it doesn't like, they don't even teach like women's history or history of the feminist movement. They don't teach anything prior to the 90s in these programs anymore. They've rebranded them all as gender studies instead of women's studies, and they just teach, queer theory and gender theory. So, all these women who are going into these programs and coming out of these programs probably do believe they're feminists, but they're pushing this really regressive, sexist, nonsensical ideology that's so harmful to women and girls. So I sort of,
Right.
I get when they say that, but it is, like you say, like it's really lacking in knowledge about the history of the women's movement. And it's lazy because it isn't just because of feminists. It's also because of grown adult men who get turned on by dressing up as women and want to be accepted as women. And in order to do that and not be perceived as like men who just have like autogonophilia or whatever they have to say, they have to, take on this born this way narrative and then invent this idea that there's such a thing as a trans kid. And it's like, we've always been like this. Like, I'm really a woman on the inside.
Yeah.
Whatever that means.
Well, it just completely devalues what we bring to the table. You don't have a child, but you are unique in that you can. Only women can. And maybe not all women have a period, but only women can have a period. And there are good things and bad things about being a woman, but one thing is that we are unique from men in that we have certain instincts, we have certain biological capabilities. We may not be as strong or as fast, but without us, our species dies. So good luck, if we're all neutered and spayed. I'm not sure what to be optimistic about there.
Yeah. So I think you mentioned in an email that you sent out to a number of people, myself included, that you were hoping to plan a rally. Are you still working on this?
Yeah, it's not going to be so much a rally. I kind of been fleshing it out with certain organizers. I think that it would be beneficial to have some kind of educational panel, because I have to admit that not everybody dives headfirst into this kind of stuff, and we are uncomfortable in certain times of talking about, genitalia, things like that. And there's just so many aspects of this. There's athletics, which they'll fight to the death to make you think that that's the tip and the end of the spear, and it's not. There's so much underneath. That's just the tip of the iceberg. We have so far to go. But the medical industrial complex, schools and grooming in schools, and then parental rights, because we have a man named Jeff Younger here in our state who lost custody of his child because he fought transitioning James. And James was 5 when his mom started transitioning him. And then prisons. I want to be on the offense here in Texas. I don't want to be playing defense when the idea that men should be housed with women comes to our state. That is just the ultimate disgrace for adult women, is to trap them with men and then say, okay, well, here, you can get condoms at the commissary. Any kind of prison sex is rape, but we're going to make it okay. Here's your condoms, and be okay with men being in a cell with you. It's awful.
Yeah. I mean, what's happened in Canada is that males who identify as trans women are and have been transferred into female prisons. Assaults and harassments have taken place. The government's completely ignoring it. The media, for the most part, is completely ignoring it. And you're right, like, it's really hard to backtrack once you're already there.
Right.
And Canada, and in my opinion, Canadian feminists really dropped the ball because so few of us fought back when they were working to pass Bill C-16 back in 2017, which was Canada's gender identity legislation. Like, I fought to write about that bill, against the bill, in Canadian media, which was very difficult because nobody would publish me.
Yeah.
And, I went to the Senate to talk about it, and, like a few other women did. But, once it passed, that was kind of it. All the legislation and policies started changing on that basis. And there are a lot of women in Canada who are fighting back now, especially on the prison issue, because it's just really disgusting and disturbing. These women already have no rights and no voice. They're among the most marginalized women in all of Canada. Like, if you think about who ends up in prison, what kind of women end up in prison, they often have histories of abuse and, addiction and poverty and so on and so forth. But
And
it's just once it's done, it's really hard to undo.
And we haven't updated, in my opinion, our laws to respect the status of a victim of human trafficking. So a lot of times they're arrested for minor offenses, or they're arrested for prostitution, and they're put into the system. Well, imagine if you're sent to prison for something like that, and you've already endured a cycle of abuse through a trafficker, and then you're housed with a man who's been convicted of sexual assault. We're just re-victimizing these women, and it's very sad. It's completely dismissing us as a very important group, and a crucial sex. And it's I don't know, I have no words sometimes, and that's really hard for me, but that's something that just completely takes my breath away, that people are okay with that.
Yeah, me too. It's really, really upsetting. So I wonder what you would tell people that's in Texas if they want to fight back against this kind of legislation, against kids being trans, against what kids are being taught in schools, and, prevent things like from happening, like what we just talked about, allowing males to be transferred into female prisons.
I think, a lot of times, particularly moms, we just have this like notion that we need to be liked. We don't want to be disliked. We don't want to be labeled as phobic, bigoted, whatever. And like I said earlier, you just have to, if this is important to you, and it should be because it's your children, it's this, it's Texas children, it's your children, it's your public education system. Stand up, go to a school board meeting and tell them you're not okay with it. Go to your legislator, no matter if your legislator is Republican or Democrat, go to your legislator and say, I'm not okay with this, and I need you to do something about it. Because from what I'm told, the Save Women's Sports bill took a long time, even though there was support among Democrats and it could have easily passed. But a lot of those Democrats weren't strong enough, courageous enough to publicly vote on the floor in favor of it. And so there's a lot of political pressure for people who even support the end of these surgeries and treatments to not be public about it, to be quiet. And if a politician knows that their votes are at stake, then maybe they'll listen up. But if you don't ever pick up a phone or send off an email or make a meeting in your district with them, they don't know any better. They're just going to follow, the mandate of their party. So get involved. It really doesn't have to be a big production, literally phone call, email, or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's really important and good advice, because I think a lot of people are scared to fight back. They're scared to say something publicly. They're scared of being fired. They're scared of being attacked. They're scared of being ostracized. But everybody doesn't have to be like a public speaker. You don't have to be like an activist. Like, you don't have to write an article. You don't have to post something on social media. Like, you can be strategic about this and talking to your political representatives. It is a really good way to let them know that this matters and that these people and these concerns are not going to be ignored. And that it might have an impact on their reelection, their political career, if they don't listen. Were you going to say something? Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay. I was going to say, I'll let you go because we've been here for an hour. It was really great to talk with you. I really enjoyed this conversation. And I hope that we'll get to meet someday. I know that some of us are working on trying to plan a panel in Austin, hopefully at the end of May or sometime in June.
Yes. So Isabella talked about it.
So. Yeah. So
have you been to Austin before?
Yeah, just a couple times this year, actually. I was there for a work thing, and then I was there when I went on Rogan, actually, whenever that was, last year sometime. So I like Austin a lot. I like Texas a lot. I like that Texas is like holding strong on so many things that the rest of the country is not.
Yeah, it's well,
So,
we're holding on by the thread. So, the more help you can send this way, the better. Um, I'm not obviously I'm not afraid to reach out to anyone who is willing to speak out on this issue. I don't care what your background is. I don't care
mhm.
where you came from. As long as you are able to stand with me to protect Texas kids, I am down. We're friends.
Yeah, awesome. I'm with you on that. Okay, well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. It was great to meet you in this way. I hope to meet you in person sometime soon.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
yeah, have a great night. Thank you.
You too.
Take
Thanks.
care. Bye.